On this episode of the Athletes Forum podcast, we head up north. We talk about the Super Serien, react to the expansion and their most recent championship game. And we talk to the voice up north, Mr. Perfect Purvis. And we talk about ELF team number 18 and who that's going to be.
We doing everything they talk about. You know I'm everything a boss about. Not putting work and gotta toss them out. I'm really biting, they just barking out. I'm really riding, they just parking now. His street, what to talk about. See the big H when I'm walking out. Yeah.
Here we go. What's going on, locker room? Welcome to the Athletes Forum podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Per usual, I appreciate all you guys' support. Hey, for this episode, I had to go up north. I had to go to an old friend, a familiar foe. You know, one of the reasons why I'm even doing the things that I'm doing right now on this podcast. All right, I had to talk to the voice up north and my guy, Perfect Purvis, they call him, and check in what's going on a couple topics. Obviously, Super Serien just wrapped up. They had an expansion. You know, what's the reaction to all that going on? And we're gonna talk about the potential ELF team number 18. You know, who's that going to be? Where is it going to be? Is it even doable, feasible, however you want to call it? But before we dive into that, let's bring the man in himself, man. What's going on, brother? How you doing?
It's good to see you, Clay. Good to see you, man. It's been a minute. But it's good to be on.
Yeah, it's been a minute. This is how the whole thing even started between us two. But it's evolved over the years. Obviously, a deeper friendship and all that stuff. So I appreciate you coming on, man.
Of course. Let's get to it.
Most definitely. Hey, before we even dive into obviously the two topics I just talked about, there's something that I gotta ask you about because you're the voice up north, so you know what's going on here. So a little background. Pre-COVID, a lot of people don't know this. I think I've told you once. I almost went to play in Finland. I almost went to play for the Steelers in Finland. What happened to my guys, man? How are we losing? How are we losing 24-8 to the Butchers?
Hey, it happens.
What's
it's
going
the Maple
on,
League.
man?
Anybody could get it. That's how I go in the Maple League. Anybody could get it, and they got it. happens. That just happened. So you caught me off guard with that one. Yeah. I was wondering why that was up there. I was like, that's so random. Yeah.
Needed that natural reaction. Hey, but I know they've been.
Just remember they were 6-0. Like they lost one. It happens. It's one loss.
Yeah, I know, but you know with how they've been playing. Obviously, the Roosters are playing good. Crocs have been good, and obviously, I sent you a picture of one of their latest signings in Taj. But you know the Steelers been playing well. I didn't think they were gonna get caught by the Butchers, maybe the Crocs, maybe the Roosters, but you know they like you said they got.
Well, I would also say it's one of those situations. I mean, if people are watching this and they see, the Butchers are now 4-3 after that game, that's the updated. Yeah, that literally came out like today. We're talking about it. Okay, but one thing that you got to understand is in the Maple League, you know, everybody plays each other twice. This was their second meeting. The first time they played each other, Kuopio Steelers pulled it out 21-7. The Butchers didn't score any offensive touchdowns. That 7 points was a pick six. This time, the Butchers jumped out 14-0 with another pick six. Shout out to Zach Wright for getting a pick six in both of these games. Just letting you know that's how good the Butchers defense is. Yeah, and really, it was 14-0 early in the first half, in the first quarter. Actually, in the first 2 minutes. With 10 minutes left in the first quarter, it was 14-0 Butchers. It was still 14-0 at halftime.
Yeah.
The Butchers eventually got up to 24-0 before at the end of the game the Steelers scored. So if you look at the game, both teams played really well defensively, but offensively the Steelers just weren't able to do anything against this Butchers defense, which has gotten much better throughout the season. So it's one of those things where in Finland, you get a full season. You don't play just 8 games.
Yeah,
like we're in week 8. They still have 4 or 5 games left. You have a 12-game season. It gives teams like the Butchers time to get better at the right time, which is more realistic to what we see in football across the United States at most levels outside of like D1 college where you have to win every week. But most football, you want to be able to get good towards the end of the season, and that's what the Butchers are doing. And you're looking at the Steelers, and you're like, they got. But it's one of those things where you rather they lose now than they lose in the playoffs.
Yeah.
You rather find out find out what the issues are now. And between those two teams, they might play each other again in the playoffs, most likely. So
Yeah,
you play each other twice and you get a best out of 3 series. And that's really the beauty of football in Finland is that you really can find out who is the best throughout a full season.
yeah. And like you said, they got so whatever. We'll take it. What's better now than down the road. But yeah, thought I'd get your reaction on that. But hey,
Yeah,
man,
you caught me off guard. That don't even happen.
wanted to reach out to you. Obviously, Super Serien just wrapped up their championship league with the Karlstad Crusaders against the Stockholm Mean Machine. And this is the first time in a while that the league actually expanded. I know we had talked a little bit. They were a bigger league before before COVID and all that happened. But what were your overall thoughts to the first season with the expanded teams?
I think it was good for Sweden. I think it was one of those things that put them on an international stage. If they hadn't expanded this year, we wouldn't be on this podcast talking right now, right? Like we wouldn't be talking about Sweden football. So in that aspect, it was really good for them to expand to 8 teams. I do think that it was a little premature. I think that the lower teams that joined the league weren't necessarily ready for the commitment that it takes to play on the top league. We saw the lower teams decide not to have imports, not to have either
Which
Europeans
is
or American imports.
rare, like a death sentence.
And that's how it turned out. Like they were able to play well against each other in the lower teams. But besides the Limham Griffins pulling an upset against the Orebro Black Knights early in the season, none of them really played well against the
Yeah,
better teams with the imports. Even though, I mean, it's kind of a cop out to say, oh, well, it's just because of imports. I don't want people to think that, oh, you just need imports. But it was noticeable difference because it's a league that doesn't have a lot of imports.
yeah,
So it's just, one player here, one player there makes a huge difference when that's all you are allowed. The Limham Griffins were one of the better Division One teams to me, but they lacked a good quarterback. Their quarterback just was not good enough for them to win games. And a lot of games, you look at that team and say, okay, defense played okay, offense couldn't do anything. If they had an American quarterback, all that changes. And then you
yeah,
look at the other teams, and it's similar. Like, oh, well, they got good defense, but their cornerback isn't that good, or their safety isn't. Like, it's one position here or there that really made a difference. But when you look at the top teams who have integrated Americans and European imports into their rosters, it just looks like a good team. And you don't see like one hole here, one hole there. You see a team playing. And for those lower teams, we just didn't really see a team playing. We saw a team that was just not as good.
yeah,
Again, it was good for the league, though. I do think it was good for the league to have that many teams. I think going to 8 was a little much. Maybe they should have went to 7, but they brought in the team from Norway, and I think that's why they went 8. But
yeah.
if, in my opinion, they should probably go back down to 7 or 6 teams.
I was just about to ask you that. Is eight sustainable at this point?
I think it's sustainable. They could do it again, but
Yeah,
you're still looking at teams that aren't willing to make the commitment to bring in imports or import coaches. Like they don't have import coaches, import players. And when I say import, I mean more like American or European imports. They don't. A lot of those teams just don't have more than one tops, and you're competing against teams that have multiple players and coaches. Orebro Black Knights, import coaches, 2 Americans. You look at all the other top teams; they all have the 2 Americans, and they have multiple European imports to match the team. So
yeah.
that's just one of those situations that you got to do.
Hey, so that brings me to kind of like my next question, because obviously following you guys in, if you don't, Pro Football Sweden, American Football Finland, you could catch their YouTube channels, and they'll be in the description below. Definitely go subscribe to the guys. Karlstad Crusaders, they were a team based on your rankings between you, Anton, and Jala, between 3 and 5. Jala may have had a middle of the pack,
Well,
but
they came in 4th last year. It's hard
yeah.
to. I mean, that's a big jump. They came in last out of 4 teams, and now they won the damn division.
So that was gonna be my question. How much of is this a surprise? Did they catch you guys? Because they ended up getting the 1 seed in the playoffs, right?
Yeah, they went. I'm pretty sure they went undefeated on the season. I don't think they lost any games.
So was it a surprise with the type of season that they were able to put together, especially in an expanding Super Series?
Not really. I think it was one of those seasons where even though they might have came in fourth last year, they could have won last year. They won the Scandinavian Cup last year, even though they came in fourth in the league. It's just one of those situations where the biggest issue, in my opinion, again, I'm not a expert on Sweden yet, but I do keep up with it. In my opinion, in the last couple of years, when Sweden only has 4 teams, those teams were, and from talking to players, a lot of players have said it, they lost the interest to, compete fully every week. And that's what usually happened over time is that a team like the Karlstad Crusaders, they're a good team. Even last year when they came in fourth place, they were a good team. But, some games they didn't have all their players. Some games they didn't have great practice. Some weeks they didn't have great practice. Stuff like that happens. And when you're playing the same people you've been playing for the last 3 years, like some players don't show up or some players just don't have enough like motivation. Putting 8 teams in the league, everybody was motivated. I heard it from across the board. I did interviews with different players, and the consensus was, well, now we don't have to play the same teams over and over. We're excited about this season. And you see what happened when Karlstad puts together their full roster. They had Tracy Gear running the defense, Billy B.D. Kennedy coaching the offensive line this year. They brought everyone back. All their players were there. They're all bought in. Everybody was playing for each other, and they were the best team throughout the season. I'm not surprised that it happened this way. I still think any of those 4 teams could have won going into the season. We just didn't know much about how it was going to shake out until they started playing.
Most definitely. And obviously, this is very premature, but looking at how these two teams played, obviously, in the championship, and it depends on imports and all that. Karlstad early favorite for next season, or it depends on off season?
I would say it depends on all season, but it doesn't make it just not. Yeah. I think Stockholm could challenge them. Tyresö probably could play against them. Even Oslo played against them better than Stockholm did in the playoffs. So you're looking at still a top heavy league. Even though Örebro didn't have a great season overall, they have the foundation to have a really good team. So you're looking at the top 5 teams in that league are still, you can draw it out of a hat who's going to be the best team next year based on independent factors and small details between them. But after that is where you start to get, well, who's going to come in 4th, 5th, 6th. That's where it's a little shaky. But again, it was good top heavy teams in this league, and for the most part, 1 through 4. And again, you had Örebro come in 4th in the regular season, but lose to the 5th place Oslo Vikings in the playoffs, and then Oslo really went toe to toe with the Crusaders before it got away from them at the end of that game, and that's who ends up winning the championship. And they convincingly beat Stockholm in the championship. It wasn't nearly as close as it was with Oslo. So again, that's 4 or 5 teams right there that it could go any way. But like you said, it does depend on what happens next year, who changes players. I don't see a lot of these teams change on a lot of parts. Stockholm has a very consistent model of players, so their roster usually is similar every year. Players come and go, but they usually have the same outcome. They're one of the top teams. Karlstad is more based on them having the players that they built. Them using their players is their key to success. Same thing with Örebro. Them using their players would be their key to success and retaining those players. And then Tyresö as well. That's one thing I really like about the Swedish league is a lot of the players are homegrown players. A lot of the players, that's where they played their youth club ball at, and they don't want to play elsewhere, which makes it really interesting. A little different than Finland. The guys in Tyresö, they don't want to play in Stockholm, which is 20 minutes up the road. So it makes it really good. Karlstad's kind of out there by itself. So if they get their players to come back, they're legit contenders again for a championship.
Most definitely, and I'm glad you brought that up because that brings us to our next topic. And shout out to Karlstad winning the Super Serien and their champions as we can see here. Another reason why I wanted to bring you on to the locker room and talk about this one particular podcast. Obviously, anyone who's followed this channel knows that it's been a heavy ELF based coverage with no pun intended, with base coverage. Now Athletes Forum Podcast is getting a little bit more diverse. All right. But one of the reasons I want to talk to you, because you are so well known and well liked and well educated on what goes on in the Viking countries. There's been talks that ELF team number 18 could be coming up north. And when I say up north, one of the favorite locations would be Copenhagen. Now, you had just mentioned, obviously, it's Sweden, totally different, Finland, totally different, about homegrowns not wanting to play anywhere else. And we've seen, obviously, the experiment go throughout Europe, obviously, with everything's going on now with Barcelona. We don't got to dive too much into it. But the team, the league wants to expand and get to 24 is the magic number. Will it get there? I don't know. But there's been talks that team number 18 could be heading up north to Denmark, Copenhagen. First initial thoughts would be what?
That's a good idea. I think that makes more sense out of all the Nordic countries because it's so close to Germany, northern Germany. You could put a team in that division. I think it's the central division at ELF. I'm not 100% sure. That has those teams that are in like the northern part of Germany. And that way the travel costs.
Central or Western?
I don't know. One of those. But I know like what I'm saying is Denmark, Copenhagen is much closer to Hamburg, Berlin, Dusseldorf out there, I think, is in that same general vicinity. Yeah. I'm not good with. Yeah. Hey, my education is from the United States, so geographically, all I know is Texas. But again, a team from Denmark would have much easier transportation to those locations than anywhere else in the Nordic countries, because Denmark is the most southern. It's the most closest to Germany. And in my opinion, a few times I've been to Denmark, I was like, hey, like Germany 2.0, because this weather good out here. Like, they get good weather out there. That's what's crazy.
You get good weather for sure.
They get good weather compared to Norway and Finland, where it's, even like Iceland, like we're much, much more north. So you would have a team that one has better weather, which means they can play into the October time that you have in ELF going into playoffs, right?
Yes. September-ish, yeah.
Yeah, September, October-ish time. So you got a team that could play into that at home and away. And then you also have a team that the traveling costs would be similar. It's not a long trip for most of those games. Obviously, going other places it will be, but it'd be more similar to a team like a Berlin traveling. And again, going from Copenhagen, it's a major hub. So there's going to be, to major cities, you're going to have a pretty good direct flight. From that aspect, my initial thoughts is, great idea. But when I think like from the football aspect,
let's get real.
Yeah, like what the hell? Like why even do it? Like I don't even understand what the point is. Like it don't make no sense to me from the football aspect.
They want the league to represent Europe, obviously. So like you see they try to divvy into like the east side, but the experiment hasn't been great thus far. A lot of the good competition is central, it's Germany. Paris making a statement now. Teams like Milan and Helvetic are trying to show that they could compete. But what does it look like up north?
I honestly, like, if I've said this before, I probably haven't said it on anybody's podcast or anything, but if they put a team in Denmark, it has to be supplemented by Sweden and Finland. And it has to be the situation where Sweden and Finnish players count as domestics, which makes the team Nordic. And from that aspect,
homegrown.
Yeah, and for that, you would maybe be able to get good players from those regions to play on that team. But again, like I said about Sweden and players wanting to play on their team, you'd have to get permission or at least some type of agreement with most of those federations. Because one situation, and again, I only talk about what I really know about. In Finland, a lot of teams don't play internationally because most international competitions won't make room for the Maple League season. So teams just really don't. If you've ever looked and seen Finnish teams play internationally, they play before the season starts. The NEFL, the CFL, they've always done it like before the season. A few times they've done it in the middle of the season to play like Swedish teams or a Danish team here and there. But normally it just doesn't mesh well because the Maple League is so well established already. So it doesn't make sense for them. But if you go over to Sweden, like the Super Serien, this last year, Stockholm played in the CEFL. and their schedule in the Super Series was adjusted so that they could play in that during their bye weeks. So they've shown that they're willing to make those type of concessions for teams, and they've done that for multiple years for the Stockholm Mean Machine, for the Karlstad Crusaders, and for Tyresö and Orebro Black Knights as well. They've played the Scandinavian Cup, the CEFL, the NEFL, and the Federation in Sweden has allowed them to adjust their regular season schedule, so they can do both. So you would probably be able to get a good amount of Swedish players to play on that team. Now the issue still comes that the Danish players, I think you would probably get them to not care about the local league. Like they're not worried about fitting it around the schedule. They would just pool the players because it's just much better football. But even though you're going to get probably the best Danish players, I don't think that's going to give you a competitive team in the ELF. I think even with a couple of Swedish players, you're still looking, and financially, I think they can figure out the import situation. I think you're getting a team that can compete, but not compete well enough that you have like a huge following or that people buy into the home team. Because again, you're basically borrowing players from Sweden, and those Swedish players are probably going to be your best players, which aren't going to be supported by people from Denmark. And then the Swedish league is still going to have its own league. And those players are still going to play on their own local teams. So competition, you might get a decent team that can win 3 or 4 games a year, but you're never going to get enough talent that people buy into that club as an ELF franchise.
And it's also hard because you mentioned they will have to kind of let other countries count as homegrown. Then you kind of open up Pandora's box, right? And it's not like, well, if I'm Helvetic, can I dive into Italy or Austria, or being that they're so close? But I guess if you have one team up north, it's something to consider.
I would say only because of the Nordic situation. That's the only reason I think that you could do that and no one would really be upset, because you have to look at places like, Finland, we only have 6 million people. Like the population is just really
You probably got 6 million
small.
people in your town in Texas.
We got 2 million in Houston where I'm from. So like that's Helsinki here, which is the biggest city. So it's just one of those situations where the Nordic doesn't have that many players to choose from in the first place compared to a lot of places. I know Switzerland is probably the biggest comparison in Europe of a small location, but Switzerland does have a high population. It's a small area, high population. Most of the Nordics, not that situation. Population is small. Yeah, it's very spread out, and the population just isn't as dense. So you're going to have less people to draw from. So I think that if you do it in Denmark, you're not going to really get a lot of people from Finland that are going to play on that team. Like it doesn't make sense traveling wise for them. And again, with the Maple League being as set as it is and organized, it really doesn't. But you'll get a couple really good Swedish players that'll come over. You already have Swedish players in the ELF playing every year because they rather play there than in Sweden. So you get some of those good players, and that would boost the competition. And I think you could get a decent team that can win 2 or 3 games a year.
A decent team that can win 2 or 3.
I mean, you'll have a team that the team from Milan and the team from Switzerland will be upset at. That's all games in those 2 franchises.
Yeah.
But it'll be multiple nationalities, and those 2 franchises will be very upset about that. But the rest of the league, it won't be a big enough like, oh, well, they're just beating everybody because they got no. They're going to win a couple of games that you just didn't think they were going to win.
Yeah.
And that'll still make the league, the parity in the league good. But again, for me, I don't know what the end goal would be. Like, who wants to build a franchise to be average? Just to be in the league. But if that's what you want, obviously, if that's what they want, I think that's possible. Me personally, I'm not here for that. Like, I'm not here for it.
We ain't here for the wasting time of it.
But honestly, like just from my personal experience of how Europeans go about their business with this football thing, just being in the league is the goal for a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of players and say, hey, do you want to play, football on the stage? You want to be professional? What do you want to do? And they're like, I'd like to be in the ELF. I'm like, be in the ELF? You're from Europe. Yeah. They're like, yeah, but I like to get in the league.
And it's
like,
crazy.
You want to be like an all-star? No, I just want to be in the league.
And that's such a cultural thing too. Like just like that's like being a sophomore in high school and or a freshman in high school and you just want to be on varsity. To say you want to be on varsity. Like I want more like obviously again culture thing, but people that
Yeah,
like
it's a cultural
are
thing.
dogs and like want to play, want to win, and want to compete and want to play at the highest level. And I mean, again, it's partly how like we're trained and grown up and taught how to compete, and a lot of these kids
But
like Jordan Poole, wide receiver for the Vikings, Italian from Milan. He didn't start playing till he was 20, and that's normal over here. That's normal in Europe. So and by the way, those who don't know, again, I put the article up. The team that they're thinking about, or the area that they're thinking about capturing in the ELF, and these are all rumors. There's an article and you could go read it or translate it, but the location that they're thinking about is Copenhagen. So we'll see how this all pans out, so to say. But I guess my final question, would be is you said, if they want to put together a competitive season, win 2 or 3 games, like even if you bring in all those other countries and the league allows those to be homegrown talent, and you still could go out and get talent, so to say. We've seen the Stockholm Mean Machine and the Copenhagen Towers compete recently in the CEFL. Stockholm put up a fight against the Flash. Shout out to my Broncos beating the Towers. But think about those teams combined with greater talent. Can we put together a team that is better than 2 or 3 games with Northern talent? Like there's talent. I see it in the league.
Let me retract my statement and get it back to 3 or 4 games. Like I feel like I feel like
where's the disparity though? Like where are they not competing at? Is it up front? Because that's the question. Up front, is it the skill position?
I think they're gonna be able to compete internationally. Like again, you're gonna have a team that's gonna be able to probably beat one of the Spanish teams. Probably can beat Barcelona at some point because they don't always get the best players, and we know that situation is bad. You're going to get a team that can probably at some point beat that Helvetic Guards. They might be able to beat the Milano Seamen. So that's 3 wins right there. And then when you start thinking like, okay, what can we do? They might be able to put a Poland team on their ass. That might happen. I'm not going to say for sure. So maybe we're like 4 wins now. After that, the rest of those games, it really depends on what kind of like imports and players they bring in. I can't forecast that. But I'm telling you, if they baseline were even import wise with those other 4 teams, they could compete with their domestics. Their domestics will compete with other domestics.
Yeah.
But once you take them into Berlin, Dusseldorf, Hamburg, Vienna, once you get into those areas, I can't tell you that they're going to be able to match up pound for pound in every position because they might not, just because those teams usually have a little bit more going for them. And it's more about a numbers thing than a per player. Like if you got the best of the best in the Nordics and put them on a team, oh yeah, you got a team that's going to be mid to top team in the division. But we both know that's not going to happen. So what you get compared to what you want to get, I can't forecast that. But I think that it's one of those situations where I say this with true meaning, and if anybody from Denmark, Norway, or Sweden feels some way about this, that's cool. If you get the Finnish players to join, you have a much better chance of actually competing in the ELF.
We've seen their impact in the league. We've seen Finland impact in the league. There's an ELF champion MVP playing for Vienna that's from Finland.
The whole Finnish coalition is out there in Vienna, right? They had a receiver, a running back, a DB. Yeah. I mean, they've shown that top-end talent in Finland is pretty high. And top-end talent in Sweden is also very high. But again, if they put a team in Denmark, you're probably not getting any Finnish players. Yeah. If you put a team in Sweden, you probably get some Finnish players to join that team. And it's just a situation about location, time, effort, how easy it is for them to make it work and stuff like that. But if you put a team in Denmark, you're going to base most of your roster, even if this is hypothetically saying that we let the Nordics be called homegrown, you're going to get most of your talent from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. And honestly, that's not going to give you the top end talent you need, in my opinion, to compete with some of the domestics from the better teams in the ELF. I do think that there are great players in those three countries as well as Finland, but I think if you end up having to pick your best ones, you'd end up with a couple more Finnish players in some of those positions, not based on just talent and raw skill alone, but also football IQ and experience. In Denmark, their youth system doesn't play 11-man football. They play 7 and 9-man football. So your team of Danish players, their actual 11-man experience is really going to be based on how long have they been playing men's? What have they only been playing when they turn 21 and they're 23? Like you got 2 years of real football experience, while a kid that plays in Finland or Sweden can play U15 all the way up as 11-man football, which we know 11-man football teaches you, the play is supposed to hit here. This is what it looks like when they do this concept. This is how a tackle is made in space. You can't get that from a league that plays 7 and 9-man football, and that's what Denmark is. And then you're going to put a men's franchise there,
a grown man,
and your players don't have grown man experience. Most of them won't. The top level players will, but again, you're not going to be guaranteed to get just top level players. And if you get just top level players from Denmark, you don't have enough players. So you're going to have to fill it up with some guys who, I've only been playing for 3 years. And then that's when you get in a situation kind of looking like what they have going on in some of the Spanish teams.
Yeah, it's an interesting propaganda we got, but ELF team number 18 is expected. This is all rumors to come up north to Copenhagen, so we'll see how it all pans out. I had to talk to the voice up north to get the insight, to give you guys the insight, the locker room. So let me know what you guys think. Drop a comment. Is ELF team number 18 Copenhagen? Can they win more than 2 or 3 games? Well, we'll see. That's gonna be a topic. But hey, brother, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate you for having me, man.
Most definitely. I'll subscribe to the channels Pro Football Sweden, American Football International, not international.
American football in Finland.
What the hell am I talking about?
I got a shirt on. American football in Finland. I'm wearing a shirt.
Pro Football Sweden, the co-host, Perfect Purpose, and the guys over there. So thank you all for tuning in. Subscribe to the channel. Shout out to First Down Magazine. And then, we'll see how this pans out.